Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Plant and Water. I'm Dennis Washington with Richard Harp, our pulpit minister at Deerfoot Church of Christ.
Hey,
Richard, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. Welcome everyone to Plant and Water. I tell you what, whoa! I just heard thunder, so we've got more planting going on because we got plenty of water today.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm hoping that our internet stays. As far as the thunder that literally just clapped right when you started. That's hilarious.
I'm sitting here. I've got the at today's monitoring over here on the right. In addition to Facebook, is also watching the weather radar because of the flash flooding that's happening.
We have our weatherman here. Former weatherman here for
That's
Birmingham.
it.
So
I'm gonna
keep me posted.
Yeah, see, exactly.
You
That's
gotta
it.
Do the hands.
I know.
Do the hands.
I need my chroma key weather wall today so I can get out there. But as you can see right there, it's a mess outside. I'm just going to go with mess right now. It is absolutely a mess. So for those of you listening days or weeks after this, it is raining cats and dogs or just raining very heavily outside, however you wish to put that. So.
Yeah, Jeanette recommended, our secretary here, she recommended that I sit outside because, that would be more realistic for Plant and Water, so.
I got home about an hour ago to the studio here, and I had to change shirts because just going from the driveway into the garage, my shirt changed colors. It was so wet. So I was like, yeah, that's not going to work at all. So, that's great. Well, listen, let's get into this, and hopefully we'll have an internet connection that'll stay with us through the show today. But let's talk. We've been on the topic of prayer now for several weeks, but specifically, the title of your sermon this past Sunday was the idea of why does prayer have its place? Tell everybody a little bit about why you chose this topic specifically.
Right. Well, it was specifically because the week before, if you've been following it, the idea was the place of prayer. We just discussed what is the place of prayer and making sure that prayer has its place in our life and that we're giving an adequate purpose to our relationship with God through prayer. And so the question, though, was, well, why does prayer have its place? What's the whole reason behind it? And I felt that it was important because we also introduced our Q&A, our monthly, every fourth Sunday, we're going to be doing our Q&As. And so I thought, well, why not ask the question, why is this so important? Why have we spent several weeks on this? And why are we spending more time on it toward the end of the year? And so really looking at this it's because it's God's will. In essence, it was God's will that we have this relationship with Him, that we communicate to Him. And so it's important for us to even consult His will and looking at His Word and recognizing what God wants for us. And so that's why this has been so important to discuss this at length. Yeah. And so that was one reason why I wanted us to answer the question and ask the question in the first place.
Absolutely. And as you and I have discussed, I mean, if there is an entry door to a relationship with God, it starts with prayer. And I think you really answered that very well this week. In fact, let's get right into it. I want to play one of the clips from your sermon this past Sunday. This clip I thought was great about where basically you talk about the idea of the only place we can turn to for help is God. And you were specifically talking about David. Let me play this clip and get your reaction to it.
David had it right. He understood who was in control as far as his deliverer, as far as his fortress, his refuge. And if you're struggling this morning, the greatest and only place you can turn to for refuge and strength is God. Look for His will.
One of the things that strikes me when I listen to that, and I'm trying to think of this in terms of someone maybe that doesn't have a strong relationship with God right now, that may be listening to this. Maybe their reaction initially hearing that is, why is God the only place that I can get help in the terms like you described there? Why can't I go to a preacher or a Christian or even just my next door neighbor or my best friend and get the help I need? I mean, why is God the only place for that?
Well, I think also just the nature of taking a clip from the greater sermon, it's excellent to be able to have a short clip that we can share. But sometimes we'll also maybe miss the full context of what's being said.
Right.
And so this could seem, when by hearing it, that this is saying, well, you don't go to a counselor, don't look for anything like that. And that's not what I'm referring to. I'm specifically within the context. What David is saying is God is our fortress. God is our refuge, meaning He will not crumble. It's a fortress that, it's funny. I think about how when we lived in Scotland, my neighbor says, Richard, he says, have you seen the castle yet? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, right up there behind our house. Apparently there was a castle behind our house, and we would walk everywhere. It was $8 a gallon for gas. And so we walked everywhere, and the shops were up the hill behind our house. And to the left of the shops was this big fenced area. And it was the foundations of a medieval fortress, a medieval castle called Lichprivik. And our road was Lichprivik Road. And I was like, what's Lichprivik? Come to find out, it was like this Pict. It was, around the time, even before the Romans conquered, Britain. Amazing history here. I'm going, I called my dad and said, hey, Dad, I found a castle in my backyard. They got so many, right?
Wow.
Which was hilarious. It was but years ago, most of the stones had been taken away and used on other buildings and other houses. And so it was just a ruin. It was just the groundwork. And so it was a fortress that had completely dissolved and was gone.
Oh, wow.
And the idea is God's fortress, the fortress that God provides, the refuge that He provides, cannot crumble, will not cease, no matter how far back it goes, because God is timeless. And so realizing this is we are not timeless. Because the next verse, man, I just happened to have it when you were going through the clip. I went, that's Psalm 144. All right, verse 4, man is like a breath. So he's saying, as I was going through, you've got here, blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle. He's my steadfast love and my fortress. Then he goes on to say refuge. And then verse 4, man is like a breath. His days are like a passing shadow. And so this is the context of what I was referring to, is that you and I, our life is a breath. It's just, it's here, and then it's exhaled, and then it's gone. We're here just for a short time. And it's in relation to man is like a breath. When God made man from the dust of the ground, same word used, Adam, where we get the name of the first man. Adam means man. Man is like a breath. Well, when God made man from the dust of the ground, He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, Genesis 2:7.
Yeah.
And so God breathed into our nostrils, but because of Adam, because of man chose to eat from the tree of life. We were eating from that. We should have been able to live forever, but they also chose to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which means that Jesus or God said that you would surely die in the day you ate it. Well, that meant we began to die, as we see in hindsight. He was referring to death that came into this world, that death reigned from Adam to Moses and onward. And so realizing because of man, who has the breath of life within us from God, our life is like a breath. Our life will be fleeting. Going back to, was it Genesis 5 or James 5, referring to, our life is like a vapor. We shouldn't be boasting about today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town, spend a year there, buy and sell, make a profit. He said, instead, you should ask if the Lord wills, we will do this or that. So seeking God's will is vital, because we have a short time on this earth. That's the context of what I was referring to. We're all going to pass away.
And it makes sense. I guess, when listening to you describe that, it's basically the idea to me is that, okay, today, like right now at 12:09 p.m. in the afternoon, you are a fortress. But there's no guarantee that an hour from now or tomorrow or next week or next year, you will continue to be a fortress, because we're human. And it's impossible for us to be fortresses forever. So if you want a fortress...
That's why we buy insurance.
Yeah.
That's why we buy insurance. I mean, I have insurance. I've got life insurance. I
Right.
have to have insurance for my vehicles.
Yeah.
Full coverage because of the deer.
Great point.
I don't even know what's coming out in front of me. So
True.
we are so limited, and so we have to have all of these things that we set in place to make sure that we're taken care of, that we're fortified.
Yeah.
Wait a second. God is the fortress that
Yeah.
will never pass away. And so that's the context of this. It's definitely not saying, hey, don't seek help from others.
Right.
There are ministers who are striving to follow God, who can be a listening ear, to encourage, to help, be there to lean on. You have the church family that God provides. The moment we become Christians, notice it, was it in Acts 2? I realize I'm talking like motor mouth here. Acts 2, in verse 41, those who heard Peter's words when he said, repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, for the forgiveness of your sins. Those who heard his word, verse 41, were baptized. There were 3,000 were added to the Lord's church.
Yep.
So simultaneously, when I'm talking about my salvation, God simultaneously adds me to his church. I'm a part of a group of believers that I can lean on. That's the church. That is, again, another word for that, kingdom, fortress.
There you go. Fortress. Yeah.
And so
all goes together.
And when I have this view that my faith is all about me, or my faith, and that I am singular, I'm on my own, I love God, but I don't love the church. Well, you might not love the church because of what someone did in the name of Christ, in the name of the church, and say, well, that's hypocritical. And if that's if that's the church, I don't want any part of it, but I'll just take God. Well, no, the thing is, that's not the church. That's someone's error. It might be Satan, tempting and testing someone.
You raise a great point there about the concept that sometimes people put their trust in someone they think is a fortress who really isn't. And the danger in that, and certainly it's not like, hey, I can sense that person is not a fortress, but I'm going to pretend that they are. I mean, sometimes they look and they walk and talk like a Christian should, but they're wolves in sheep's clothing in essence. And I guess that ultimately leads to this concept that even if we find people in our lives that are fortresses for us, we've still got to go beyond them and through them and develop that relationship with God, where God is our constant source, our constant fortress, and we have people in our lives that can supplement that if they're there. Word. I mean, would that be the best way to describe that?
Yes. When I think about people that I have respected and trusted, like in high school, I had a professor who ended up doing some horrible things later on. When I found out in college that some things he was doing, he was someone that was just a phenomenal. He was my biology professor, phenomenal in what he did, and he even used the book, that talked about evolution, and he pointed to God in it. I mean, this man was a man, and he struggled, and he served his time for it. But when I first heard it, it was shattering. Yeah. So the thing is, we can't put our faith in man. Man isn't strong enough to be able to take on my struggles. If I go to dump on someone, for instance, is he strong enough to be able to take my struggles along with his? Yeah. There's nobody strong enough, and so, you talk about the burden and the pressure. Oh, Galatians 6:1 is so important. It says, if your brother is caught in a trespass, a sin, you who are spiritual must restore a brother in a spirit of gentleness. We have a responsibility as a part of the church. You are spiritual. So if you're part of the church, you are one who is spiritual. Right. You have a responsibility to go to those, to be that fortress for them. But it says this, to restore them. But it says, keeping watch over yourselves, lest you too be tempted, verse 2.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Because my spiritualness is not in me. It's not, look at how good I am. I
Right.
find that I'm tempted the worst the moment I have tried to encourage someone else. Man, these are the things I did when I went through these temptations, and I overcame them. And then Satan comes along and says, we'll see. We'll see if you're strong. And then you're like, whoa, it hit you right in the face.
Yeah.
We cannot take what maybe we once had with our faith in God and then say it was my shoulders that did it. It was my faith that got me through. It was faith in God that got me through. Therefore, it was God who got me through.
Wow.
He is my fortress, not me. So why does prayer have
That's
its
powerful.
place? It's because I rely on him, not relying on me. And if I'm doing that, then I can help others along the way. But I am just like, whoa, John the Baptist. He said, he must increase, but I must decrease. So the idea is John the Baptist, he had a following. His disciples were coming to him, and they were confused by, why are all these people going to Jesus? He must increase, but I must decrease. John could have been like, I have liked this recognition. I have liked this, this status.
Well, he could say, "Look, I'm the guy that baptized Jesus. I'm the guy. It was me. I mean, nobody else can claim that."
We're a good team here.
You nailed it. You absolutely nailed it. I love how you put all that and arranged all that. Absolutely, this is incredible.
Jesus nailed it because in essence, nailed him to the cross. He's
True.
the one that he is the one that is taking on everything. Yeah. And so just like John, he was willing to say, he must increase, but I must decrease. John recognized, though, later on that he was in prison. He didn't know how long it was going to be. He even sent his disciples to Jesus to make sure that he was the one. Shortly after, he was killed.
Yeah.
So he never came out of that prison cell. So he recognized that it wasn't about him. Again, it gets back to this point. It's not about us because our life is a breath.
Yeah.
And so what should we do with every breath that we have within us? We glorify God. Yeah. And so it's God's will, therefore, that we can even speak to him. Therefore, we must seek his will. That's why in prayer we find, let your will be done, not mine, the majority of the time.
That's great. I love that. I want to get quickly to this is fantastic. I want to get quickly to another clip from your sermon, one more clip. You talked about prayer being the greatest place. We talked, and let me play this. It's less than a minute long, but and then get your reaction to this.
Knowing the right thing to do and failing to do it, this is all within the context of seeking God's will in our lives. If we don't seek his will, we again have the choice to seek our own will or to seek God's will. At that very fundamental, by seeking our own will, what did that do in the life of Adam and Eve, and therefore in your life and my life? They chose their own will, and it brought death. It brought sin. And so if we seek our own will, and that is our priority, that is our focus, then that is sin. And so we're getting this understanding that God had a will for us to be here, to pray to him, to realize then that we in turn give our prayer back to him, seeking his will in our lives. Prayer is the greatest place for us to seek God's will. Knowing the right thing to do and failing to do it. This is all within the context of seeking God's will in our lives.
Hear it again.
Yeah, we'll play. It was so good, we got to hear it again. But I love that thought about a place of prayer. So many times we think about prayer as an action, as a verb, but in this case, you're talking about it in terms of a noun, as a place. That and certainly the verb is important, but the noun, it sounds like, is just as important.
Well, it's the fortress. It's the and we were referring to before when Jesus is referring to prayer. Don't be like the hypocrites who are standing on the street corner or in the synagogues, the gathering places, that they might be heard and seen by men. He says, but you go into your room and lock the door. That is the inner room. So he's literally giving it a place where the door is closed behind you, nobody is seeing it, which is stopping any concern that people might be your purpose, or people might be your reason for even approaching God.
Yeah.
The idea is, if you have that intimate relationship with God within that noun, like you're saying, within that place, he will fortify you. He will give you strength that cannot come from yourself. I mean, it goes to, Philippians 4, where the idea is be anxious for nothing.
Yeah.
But in everything, by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God that goes beyond all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus.
Let me ask you a question about that.
Man,
to
that's
that
powerful.
end,
Yeah.
It also occurs to me in this case that it's not a one and done kind of thing. You can't just pray once and it's like, okay, I'm good for the rest of my life. Is there something that's addressed here that talks about the frequency of prayer in this case to get those benefits as you just described, that fortress? I mean, is there a prescription like our medicines we take? It says, take twice a day and it will help deal with these problems. I mean, is there a frequency
That's a
prescription?
good point. We can look at Daniel, who prayed 3 times a day when was it Daniel chapter 6 and verse 6 through 10. Daniel is he's going to God in prayer because he's been told for the next 30 days you're not allowed to pray to anyone but the king. And so he goes and prays 3 times a day, but it says as he had always done. And so because he had done this when it was a time of a supplication, an urgent request to meet a need, the moment he really needed God, where did he go? It was just second nature because he'd always done this. He went to prayer. He didn't go, oh, what am I going to do? Go to the other presidents, or go to the other satraps and the other governors that were over. They were the ones that were actually causing the problem. He went to the source. He went to the fortress. He went to God, and so I think that's important. That gives you the frequency. But in which we approach the throne of God. But I was thinking about something before, and I just didn't. Don't you love that?
Well, I interrupted your thought, and that was partly my fault on that. But and I guess
it came from what you were saying.
Well, the idea too about praying continuously. I mean, there is some this idea that okay, you should never stop praying. But
right.
you can't walk around 24/7 every breath and offer a prayer. I mean, you there's got to be some interaction at some point too.
Right. Well, yeah, I think it's something. If we just do it because I'm doing it when I get up in the morning because I'm supposed to. I'm doing it when at noon, right before my meal, because I'm supposed to. I do it, by my pillow at night because I'm supposed to. No relationship works that way.
Right.
And again, you had mentioned before, and this is what it was. You had mentioned about one and done. When I go to pray to God, it's not this one and done. In essence, when it comes to my most important relationship on this earth is my wife and I. Right. So when I told her I do, that meant that I would love her, I would honor her, I would cherish her as long as we both shall live. And I told her that I loved her on that day. Now, if I were to come to her and say, well, baby, if I change my mind, I'll let you know.
Right.
Yeah. I told you I loved you then.
Well, yeah, you can't just say it on your wedding day and then not say it and show it any other day after that. True. That's a great point.
How would that help my relationship? My relationship with my wife would be just nil. That would be a horrible trap that she would be in.
It's a great point.
Because she found that out on that day. He's never going to say it again.
That's a great point.
When it comes to my relationship with God, realizing we love because he first loved us. We find that in 1 John chapter 4. We find that God is love there. And so when I recognize just how much God loves me is why I want to have the relationship with him, is what John is saying. So with the fact that it is God's will that I'm able to speak to him helps me recognize that I'm going to seek God's will in my life. It was God's will to send his son, in essence, to be the mediator between me and God and to take away my sins, to be the covering for my sins so that I can stand before God one day, and then for all eternity. That is a humbling place to be. That is a place where we talk about this place. That's a relationship that was set because of Jesus and because of my decision to follow him.
Yeah.
And so I'm forever indebted to God. And so because of this, I want to pray to God. Because of this, I need to pray to God. If I lose sight of that,
great point.
Want and need. If it wasn't because of that, it would be, I'm supposed to, we're sitting there eating. I forgot. All right, y'all grab hands. And it's doing it because we're supposed to do it.
Versus doing it because we want to do it. Right.
For instance, I study for a test. I have to pass a test so I can get the grade so that I can go to school, that I can get a college degree and get a good job. That's school in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So
true.
I could study the syllabus, then I can get the maybe Spark Notes. I can study all of the points that I think are going to be on the test, and I can study and I can ace that test, but know nothing about the concept. Right. I can know nothing about the actual information, where the test is there to actually see what you know. And so we can ace every test because we have the facts, we know the facts, but we don't know the subject. We can pray to God because we're supposed to. We can go to church and be a part of the church because we're supposed to, and not know God, not know each other, because we're just A to B. It's part of checking off the box, part of my day to day, because that's what I'm supposed to do, and I can do that for the rest of my life and not know God, not know Him, and actually let it hit me in the heart.
Yeah,
and that's a shame.
That's powerful, right there.
If we've missed that,
I love that.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit while we've got a little time left. I want to get to our last question, or our question of the week. But before that, talk to us a little bit about what you're planning this coming Sunday.
All right. Well, what we're looking at is the hands of prayer. The hands of prayer, specifically in 1 Timothy, and it's chapter 2 and verse 8. And this one is often misunderstood. Verse 8, it says, I desire then, Paul's saying this to Timothy, that in every place men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. And I will mention that that's a semicolon. So that's not an end of a thought. And so oftentimes when we've taken that verse, we just look at the lifting of hands part, and we think, well, this is talking about the posture of our prayer, but we are missing woefully what he's referring to when we've missed that point. Specifically, 3 words we're going to focus on in this passage, and that is holy, anger, and quarreling. Holy, anger, and quarreling.
Not necessarily something you might think of with hands. Those 3 words, that may be not something you would normally think of in terms of hands. So that's interesting.
And this will be a little snippet into Sunday. When I'm angry, what do my hands do? They're clenched.
Yeah, they're not usually all wrapped up and where you can't see them. They're usually it's a great point.
Yeah, when I'm angry, my hands and my teeth are in a clenched fist.
Yeah, your hands are talking, in other words. Yeah.
My hands are talking. When I'm quarreling, where are my hands? They're maybe in a pointed form, pointing right back at the person. Why you always do this? What are you doing? And point. Well, I mean, your hands have a lot to say, like you said, when it comes to quarreling and anger, but then also in our prayer. Are our hands holy as we are approaching God?
Wow.
Or are they angry, or are they quarreling? And he's referring to men here. This is aner, meaning men or husband. It's not humankind. So a lot of times when the word man is used, it would be anthropos, meaning humankind, could be man and woman. And this is specifically men, because at the end of that semicolon, he says, and women, so that's not men, are to go, and it goes on and it talks about the apparel in which a woman is to wear. And it says in every place. So this is referring to worship. This is referring to prayer and worship, specifically the leading of prayer. And so I'm truly excited about this discussion.
Will be great.
I hope that it lays to rest some of the misunderstandings. And I think when we just look at raising hands, we can actually be guilty of verse 9 and 10. But that just so
no,
we're looking at
great.
that. That's 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10. Just read 8 through 10 and just look at what he's saying. I would consider read 1 Timothy 1 and 2 to give you the foundation, the fundamental for what we're going to be talking about on Sunday.
That'd be great. Well, listen, we'd love for everybody listening and watching the show today to join us this Sunday, September 30th. 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock is our worship service times on Sunday morning. We're located 5348 Old Springville Road in Pinson, mailing address. But just go to our website, deerfootcoc.com, and you can get directions there to the church building. So in our last little bit of time we got left, Richard, it is time for our question of the week, which is you teased this question from the pulpit Sunday night during our question and answer session at the church building Sunday night, which I thought was tremendous. Went great, and this question
from the question from our congregation, so that's what made it great. I'm telling you, the questions were outstanding.
But so this question was one we ran out of time to finish answering on Sunday night. So you told everybody, hey, watch the Plant and Water podcast on Wednesday, and we'll finish answering the question. So
we get to the end of Plant and Water today to try to answer it. So exactly. I apologize for that. But this will be a tease for next month as well.
That's it.
The question is, could you explain Genesis 6:4 in particular, the sons of God, whether they were righteous men or angels? And this is important to see when we're looking at 6:4. I'm going to read it again. It says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Now, the word for Nephilim in the Hebrew, this is a transliteration, and so it's not a translation. We don't know actually what Nephilim means. The Septuagint gave it the word gigantus in the Greek, and so that's where you might get the word giant, Nephilim, gigantus, giant. Okay. And so this is the idea of the giants, but the Septuagint came, several years, almost 1,000 years after, over 1,000 years, after the book of Genesis. And so we assume that it's referring to giants. And so another writing that's interesting is the book of Enoch. And we discussed that. This is why this was at the end of our discussion, because we had another question on the book of Enoch. Now, the book of Enoch, at the latest, is 200 years before Christ. And so it's 1,000 years after the book of Genesis. And the writers, plural, attribute it to Enoch. Couldn't have been Enoch because he'd already been taken up at that point. But it's interesting, they pick up at Genesis 6 and verse 4 in this book. It's always considered the pseudepigrapha, pseudo meaning false, grapho, writings, the false writings. So it was never considered to be a part of the Bible, and so that's important to realize. Because, for instance, mainly it's because of the way what they wrote about the angels, that they saw the daughters of men and they lusted after them and came down and had their way with them and created these giant beasts. Well, do you see how that sounds similar? And so we have to be careful as to what's being said here, because we have to be using this document that was 1,000 years after it was written. And so the way I approach this is, what does the context have to say? And who are the sons of God and who are the daughters of men? I really do like the context because I find that the context gives an answer. Yeah. Context is always the best commentary. Some negate that. But at the end of the day, these are things I'm going to be asking God. What was this? But context is much better than what I think. Context is much better than what anybody else thinks.
Right.
Even somebody who was at this point, 2,200 years ago.
Yeah.
It's still 1,000 years removed from the original. Okay, so it's important to look at this. Okay, I was going to make sure context shows in chapter 4. We have to go all the way back to chapter 4, where you've got Cain and Abel that were born to the first two sons of Adam and Eve. But then Cain kills his brother Abel, and then Cain, he is cursed by God. A mark is put on Cain, and he has to become a nomad, a wanderer, which is really a horrible punishment for Cain, because why? He's a farmer. A farmer needs to have land in order to be able to produce crops. Well, his punishment was you're going to be a nomad. You're going to be wanderer on the earth. Well, verse 16, notice it says, then Cain went on his way from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. He was told he was to be a wanderer, and yet he settled down. This is something, again, going against God. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his sons, Enoch. This may cause a question, well, who did he marry? Who did Cain marry? If he's the first son and Enoch, is the second son, where are these daughters? Well, this is important to realize that when we see at Genesis 6:4 that the sons of God and the daughters of men married, there's two lineages that are mentioned we're about to see. So you go on and you see this lineage. Could be that Cain is marrying from his brother's side, because we know that Adam lived to be 930, and we understand that he had other sons and daughters at his old age. It's not the same as we have today.
Right.
And so Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters. It could have been his sister, could have been his niece, could have been, we're not entirely sure. But let's keep going. It says, to Enoch was born Irad. Irad fathered Mehujael. Mehujael fathered Methushael. All right, this gives you the lineage. There's these lineages. Then you go down to Lamech. Lamech, he kills a man for wounding him, much like his great-great-great-grandfather, Cain. Then look at verse 25 of chapter 4. Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also was a son was born. He called his name Enosh. And that time people began to call upon the name of the Lord. This is the first time that we actually find this phrase, to call on the name of the Lord. This concept of worshiping of God. And what does that sound like? You sounds like you've got sons of God here. It's really is showing some interesting perspective.
Right.
Well, it would just so happen from this line we have Enoch, who walked with God, was taken up because he was not. He was so righteous, God didn't, just took him up, just like Elijah in a chariot. So we see that God blessed Enoch. Well, from Enoch, we have his great-great-grandson is Noah, and Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And notice it says, when Lamech had lived 182 years, and this is chapter 5, verse 28, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground the Lord has cursed. This one shall bring us relief from our work, from the painful toil of our hands. And so you have this relief from God through the line of Seth. So it's showing a line of Cain brought about disobedience to God and also death. And then you have a line that comes from Seth that was calling on the name of the Lord, that was walking with God, that was finding favor in the eyes of the Lord. So verse 1 says, when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any as they chose. So I believe context can show that the sons of God were from the line of Seth, the daughters of man were from the line of Cain. And so this is how, and also they were far apart from each other because he was sent far away from where they were. And so this could be how this took place. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for his flesh, his days shall be 120 years. And then we have our passage, the Nephilim on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Well, the next part to that question I think does have merit. It says, if they were righteous men that got together with unrighteous women, what would make their children mighty and renowned? So what would have caused them? And so this is another thing. It's saying, well, how could they have been mighty and renowned just by these two men and, men and women coming together, maybe from the line of Cain and the line of Seth?
Right.
Well, I think there could be an answer to this. Again, I explained this is something I'm going to ask God about.
Right.
But it goes back to verse 11 of chapter 4. Remember, we said in 16 is where Cain began to have his lineage. So before he had children, something happened to him. He was cursed to be a nomad wanderer, but he was also cursed with something else. Verse 11, it says, now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. So it would be, then see verse 15. Then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Now this mark would be a sign that God is with him, a sign that you can't mess with him, a sign that you can't kill him.
Right.
Well, there's been a lot of conjecture as to what this sign is. I mean, over the years, people have come up with some pretty interesting things. But if in keeping with this context, it could be that his growth plates no longer stopped. Like it could be that he continued to grow. Could be that he just didn't. You see that. You see people who will have a tumor in their growth plate, and they just keep on growing, and they'll be 10 foot tall. Well, we know, Goliath in Numbers 13:33 is referred to. We have the sons of the Anakim, the sons of Anak. And so we see that there were these people who were very tall, and we have the LA Lakers today. Yeah. And so we see what I did there. We have people who are very tall today. So it's interesting. It could be that he just put a mark on him, and he kept growing.
Right.
If anything, what was the whole reason behind it? It was that whoever finds me, lest any who find him should attack him. I wouldn't want to attack somebody who was head and shoulders above me, who was taller than me.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah.
There's a practical look to possibly why how he was marked. So that could be an answer to how those from the line of Cain, caused this line of people being taller.
Right.
And so again, then the next part to that was, then can you also explain what does the word renown mean? Well, I looked at the word renown. You and I know it means, I thought, well, that's kind of obvious. It's like they're well known. Well,
right.
It's interesting. You look at the Hebrew, it's the same word as in actually a name called Seth. The name Seth. And so verse 32 of chapter 5, which is right before chapter 6, verse 1, the end of chapter 5 says that after Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Did I say Seth? I meant to say Shem.
Yeah, you said Seth. Yeah.
I meant to say Shem. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
Shem.
Okay.
Shem.
All right.
Shem means name or renown.
Oh.
And so it's possible, because we have just 5 verses later, these men, or 4 verses later, these men of renown. It could be men of Seth, because it's the same word. And context has used it just 4 verses before, and that could be why in 1 Kings 13:33 we have the sons of Anak, the Nephilim, same word used. Because what happened between Genesis 6:4 and 1 Kings 13:33, a massive flood. And who survived the flood? Shem. So who was carrying possibly that lineage with him? Could be that
It makes
the corridor
sense.
was much taller for Shem than
When you
anyone
start
else.
to connect all the dots, it makes absolute sense. No doubt
It
about
makes
that.
absolute sense as to why the Nephilim didn't die in the flood. And so
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. And if anything, these questions are serving to these are things I've never seen. And so please search them for yourself and look at this fact. But I consulted someone who knew the Hebrew, and he confirmed what I saw in my lexicon. This is the same word. So that is used for Shem, but Shem's name means renown.
Yeah, that's
Just
great.
like Adam's name means man, Adam is
Yeah.
Man, right? So
That's great. That's fascinating. I love to
At
see
the end
how
of
the
day,
dots all
it's
connect.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Listen, we're about out of time, but if people have got a Bible question, what's the best way for them to reach you to get their question answered?
Well, it's richard@deerfootcoc.com. Our website is also deerfootcoc.com. But if you put richard@deerfootcoc.com, that will get to me via email. And if you have any questions concerning what we've been discussing, maybe some comments that would help us as far as our discussion is concerned, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
We look
yeah,
forward
we had several folks join us online today, and we appreciate everybody that watched us recording the podcast today live on Facebook. Of course, you can
Great.
always get this podcast through iTunes or your favorite podcast app. Just search for Plant and Water or Deerfoot Church of Christ, and you can find that. Or just visit our website at deerfootcoc.com. You can get the links there. So, Richard, we are out of time. But we'll continue this next week. It's been great. It's been fantastic. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you on Sunday.
All right. We'll see y'all later.